Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Not Content Podcast. My name is Jerome joined as always by Brian. And Brian, this week we are going to be doing a double feature. This is your bright idea, of course. We are taking a look at the Hammer horror series. Two of their movies, The Mummy from 1959, as well as Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde from 1971, and we will be discussing these movies momentarily. As always, please leave a 4 or 5 star review on Apple and Spotify to get those algorithms going. Please like and subscribe on YouTube. Don't forget to click on the bell icon so that you can get notifications. Brian, this is a tale of two movies. I think Hammer horror, for me, it's a mixed bag. I think there are some movies that I think are pretty entertaining. Like the thing that I like is their movies kind of 90 minutes or less. Like you're in and out very quickly, sometimes even shorter. So I like that. I think that sometimes they're like because horror has evolved so much now. I feel like some of the stuff, especially in the Mummy 1959, just isn't as interesting, and it's kind of boring as well. I definitely appreciated Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. There are some really interesting elements and getting around a low budget that I appreciate. But yeah, I know this is your selection. So why are we talking about these two movies?
Well, last year we did review the 1999 Mummy. I did reference this movie when we did review that movie, and we kind of wanted to have like Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee face off, and this is kind of like one of those movies. And we could have talked about the other Frankenstein movie or the Dracula movie, but I feel like a lot of people have covered those already, and the Mummy's not nearly covered enough. So I thought I'd give it some love, even though it's not nearly as good. Same director, Terrence Fisher, as like all the other Hammer horror movies that are famous with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. And the interesting thing about this is that again they're taking a Universal property, trying to revamp it this is what 30 years after the original. We're getting Technicolor for the first time on the Mummy, and I think what they were trying to do is just kind of like wow the audience, less so like focus on the plot, which we're going to talk about in a second because the plot is terrible and the editing is terrible. But I think the colors are just right on what for a Technicolor movie in the 50s for an audience to react. It's like the perfect kind of color palette, and you get a little bit of violence mixed with like this mummy that's in color. That's like he looks like he's 7 feet tall, but it's just Christopher Lee in lifts, and he's just covered in bandages. But he looks so like a dead dude walking. I thought it was really impressive the way he performed, even though he had very little to do when he was the mummy. But again, it's just a visual. I think it's just more of an audience kind of shock factor. These movies are designed to get box office shock value because these are like X-rated films, quote unquote, before the rating system really got under control in the 80s. But this is more like to get that shock value dollar, which is a lot of their budget or a lot of their box office that kind of like contribute because these movies are really really cheap, like $100,000, $200,000. They make their money back on like 2 to 3 million on a box office receipt per movie worldwide, and you get your money back and you just keep going. So that's kind of the idea. And for these two, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, I mean, they're legendary figures. So I thought it'd be nice to kind of see them in like different kind of ways because they're not intellectually like you know taking jabs at one another or like being intellectual like when it like in the Dracula movie, it's very much like Dracula versus Van Helsing, that dynamic, the two smart intellectual foes, right? In this case, they kind of like put a handicap because at the beginning of the movie, Peter Cushing gets an injury and he's got to limp for the rest of the movie. And of course, we know the mummy is like a slow walking dead dude. And I texted Jerome in the middle of watching. I was like, you know what? If they made a Jason movie in the 50s or the 60s, Christopher Lee would have been perfect to play Jason Voorhees because he can nail that walk down perfectly. He's menacing because he's tall. And, all these different people like he's 7 feet tall, the mummy. And then it keeps changing that he's 10 feet tall. But it's just because of the way it's, the shock value and everything. Everyone's like, oh my God, this thing is tall, and it's really just like a 6'6" Christopher Lee and mummy rap. So that's kind of fun to watch. But other than that, those are the kind of the positives. I love the colors and stuff, but this does have serious editing issues, and you can tell that this movie went out of order when it didn't have to. It should have been in order, like the '99 Mummy. And I think you can tell, like the '99 Mummy took a lot of ideas from this as well. The revenge stuff, the stuff about taking the tongue out, the affair with the princess, the reincarnation of the princess, all these different things and ideas ended up being in the '99 movie as well. So I thought that'd be a nice little connection there. I know Jerome didn't really like this a lot, but at least you got Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in the
I mean, you
band
don't
for
get a
having
lot
the.
with Christopher Lee in this movie. That's the thing is that he is very much handicapped by not being really able to speak, and I think you lose some of that. I think you lose what makes Christopher Lee great in some ways. Again, we know that he can play this type of role and he's willing to do that, but I think that when he is at his best, it's really about the dialogue and whatnot. Peter Cushing. I mean, what else can you say about Grand Moff Tarkin that hasn't been said a million times? He's kind of an amazing figure because it just feels like he was kind of laying low and doing a lot of these schlocky horror movies, and then he's in Star Wars, and that kind of is what people remember him for. But he has a long career, being a British stage actor, and coming into these movies. And what we can never forget is once you get into the advent of television, television is really taking people away from like going to the movies as frequently. So I think in order to get people in the door, I think you have to do the shock value, and that's why I think you do see. That's why I think a Hammer horror is able to exist a lot easier in 1959, around this time period than you would have seen 10, 15 years earlier, because especially being in a world war, I don't know that people would have wanted to see that, but it's in the 50s. Things are slightly more peaceful. I mean, there's a Cold War, but I think people are much more willing, to engage with this kind of material than they would have been, during the Depression or even during World War II. And the other thing that you have to take into account, with the advent of television, or with the advent of this movie, is that we are going for color, and obviously most TVs, if not all TVs in 1959, are black and white. So the colors have a lot more value than they would now. Like, you can't shock people the way that you could, because we see everything in color now, and we have seen far worse, like gross looking mummies and gross body parts and that stuff. So the shock value is much more difficult, in a modern version of the Mummy as opposed to this.
Which is why I think the '99 movie went more adventure, action adventure, Indiana Jones ish, less the horror.
Right. I think that's a good thing. I mean, I don't think they had a choice.
Exactly, especially coming from this movie, it's like this. They pushed the horror as far as you can go with an action adventure plot like they had in here. Um, the most you can do is just show like the violence of the mummies and the stabbings and all that stuff. And you definitely get that in this movie. Like, I think this might be the first mummy movie, quote unquote, to actually have blood in it. I'm not entirely sure on that, but I mean there are instances of blood. Like, there's a scene where they kill the guards in the flashback because they want the guards to stay with the dead queen for the rest of the eternity. So it's off screen, but they come back out and the other guards have like these bloody like swords. So it's like, oh shit, they just killed 6 dudes off screen. And usually you don't get that in 1959, especially that violence. So they were trying to push the boundaries for what they could. And the scares are not too like, like jump scares. It's more so like, holy shit, there's a fucking 7-foot dude trying to kill me right now, wrapped in mummy wrap and all that shit. So they got that part down. Like the horror that was in the original Mummy, that feeling of like there's a dead guy roaming around, right? And the thing I did appreciate about the plot, even though this does have a lot of like bad structure, is that the cops actually believe that Peter Cushing. At first, they're like, "Okay, come on, a dead guy running around," and then like 20 minutes later, like, "You are absolutely right. We need to get you to safety. There's a dead guy coming after you." So at least that part was
Yes.
interesting. Yeah. But other than that, like I think the third act kind of wraps everything up perfectly. I think once you get to the third act, that's kind of what you want to see. Um, and it's just basically like a revenge story about this Egyptian guy who feels like they desecrated the tomb because these white, European settlers came in, or not settlers, but archaeologists came in
White
taking our
Europeans, am I
stuff.
right?
Yeah, that's the subtext. So they kind of like don't go too deep into the subtext. They go more over to the curse stuff and everything, and they make the Egyptian the bad guy when really, if you think about it, he's just protecting his land, but he ends up using the mummy as a revenge device for murder. But other than that, he did have good intentions, I think, because he really wanted to protect the whole thing, but the whole tomb or whatever. But shit happens. But other than that, I love the colors. So this for me is like a 6 out of 10. And this really should have been shot, or not shot, but it should have been edited in order because it starts at a place, it starts in modern time, and then it flashes back, and then there's this voiceover. But if you watch the '99 Mummy, they kind of fixed that issue and just gave the Egyptian guy the voiceover role as well, and then just tells you what happens in order, so the audience is not as confused. Because it felt like halfway through the movie it was like, okay, this is just a giant summary of what's going on, and then the last 30 minutes are just the chase part. So that's kind of where it got disappointing. And they didn't lean too much into the idea that the woman was like reincarnated as the princess. They didn't really push into that idea too much. They put it out there and presented it to the audience, but they don't dive into it, which is why I think the '99 Mummy took that idea and just like, let's really run with this idea and just kind of like stretch it out over two movies, which they did. So in that case, I think this is a good place to like kind of compare and contrast if you want to watch the '99 Mummy again, because we know we watched it every year on TV. But if you happen to find this, we found it on HBO Max. I find it on HBO Max.
Yes, it
It's a
is on
really good
HBO
print.
Max, presumably for the month of October,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
Halloween season, and I'm sure you're going to find a ton of horror movies on your
yeah.
various
So don't
platforms.
expect too much, but it's a fun watch. You get your Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, and just kind of appreciate the colors for what they were. Because in '59, man, if I were a 5-year-old kid watching this for the first time, I would probably be blown away just by what I'm seeing in the color scheme.
I mean, I would agree with you. Let's talk about something that is even more scandalous: Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. We have a former Bond girl in one of the lead roles here, and this movie is definitely more interesting and has a lot more going for it. I would say. I think the performances are better. I think the plot line is better. Is it? This is also an extremely horny movie as well. There is everybody wants to have sex with each other, and I don't know. I think that there is something like you because you just don't get that level of horniness in a lot of modern movies. So I think that's partially why it works. But I think why I like this movie a little bit better is that it feels a lot more focused, and I think the pacing is better, and just the way that they're able to get into things. And I do have to say that Ralph Bates is a very compelling Dr. Henry Jekyll slash Jack the Ripper. I think he is. He definitely gives a very strong performance and embraces what. I mean, this could be a very schlocky like horror movie in its own right, but I think he really elevates it.
Yeah, so a little quick background. This is a basic Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde story switched out to be, transferring from a man to a woman. So it's got that trans subtext to it. It's a transgender
Oh, big
story,
time. Yes. I
but
mean,
I
and
think the writers didn't even realize it at the time. They just thought it was a cool idea. But there's been this interview that I watched with Martine Beswick talking about this movie, and she's like, "We had such a great premise and such a great idea that we should have pushed it further, but we didn't." And it's so like, if we only pushed it further, she said. So she knows that like this was a great premise to play with, and they just lean more into the slasher territory towards the end instead of like maybe exploring more of the themes and the relationships, which I think would have been more fascinating. And this is why when I first saw this movie last year, I texted Jerome and was like, I think I just found the perfect remake for an A24 movie in the modern era, and you can do it super cheap. And I just kind of explained the plot. And then once
as
you watch it this
opposed to
year,
giving $50 million to make the latest rock bomb at the box office, right?
correct. Smashing Machine, no comment. I did like the performance, though. It was not an Oscar worthy performance. But on topic, back on topic, this movie is just like so grounded. Like there's hardly any special effects. It's just
I
simple,
agree with
pure
you. I
photography.
think that's the coolest part of it is that it is so homegrown and the way that they use hands in this movie and the way that they shoot like the transformation it's really good. Like again, it's not like I think people would kind of laugh at it today, but I think I appreciate the ingenuity. And to be honest, I prefer seeing something like this as opposed to CGI.
Yeah, I think, God, I hope if they ever remake this, they can't do CGI. Now, I know they did a '90s type remake of this that went nowhere, and it was like a comedy and it like straight to video, and no one even knows about it. I forget what it's called, but it's very similar plot. But in this case, not nearly as good as the execution. So basically, the idea is this Dr. Jekyll, quote unquote, is trying to find the elixir of life, and he's like, why do women last longer? Why do they live longer than us? And why do they keep their hair more? And all these different things. Then he starts going down this rabbit hole of science, and he realizes that, oh, female hormones are the key to long life, and it just goes down this experiment rabbit hole. He gets the elixir, turns into Martine Beswick, and he starts to realize like, oh shit, this does work. I can live longer, but I need to kill people, or I need to kill virgin women. I'm not virgin women. I think he figures that out at the end, that maybe he needs a virgin for the end, but he starts killing all
I
these
mean, it
women.
seems like he's killing a lot of sex workers, quite honestly.
Right, not virgins yet. He figures out he needs virgin blood apparently, or some kind of weird way he needs it, which is his neighbor. We'll get to that in a second. So he's doing the Dr. Jekyll traditional killings, and it's very interesting because halfway through the movie he kind of stops it, but then he realizes that Mrs. Hyde has taken over at times and done and continue the killings for him. So it's very interesting in that aspect because like it's usually just the monster Hyde doing the killings. In this case, they did both. So I thought that was really cool. And then he starts to lose control, and then his neighbor. Here's where it gets interesting, folks. His neighbor, who's the virgin woman I was talking about, falls in love with him,
Oh man,
right? And then
this
she
is
has
the
a
part where
brother.
everybody wants to have sex with each other.
Yeah,
Yep.
the brother falls in love with the Mrs. Mrs. Hyde character, right? So it becomes this weird sexual dynamic because there's scenes of them making out, and then all of a sudden, like the sister comes in and they have to stop, and then seconds later or minutes later, she transforms back into Dr. Jekyll. It's very like really like complicated in terms of relationship wise, and I love that. I just want more of that. Like I want them to explore that in a remake. If like they do a scene where like all of a sudden they sleep together, right? The brother and Mrs. Hyde, and she wakes up and it's Dr. Jekyll. Can you imagine that reaction of like what the hell he would do and like trying to get out of the room, or would he like freak out? Would the brother wake up? Like there are so many things you can explore with this, and I think that's what Martine Beswick was talking about. It's like we could have pushed this even further, but we hit 90 minutes and we had to stop, and they had to lean into like, oh, we have to still make this a horror movie, so let's focus on like slasher stuff at the end. But man, it just feels like this great setup to a great modern A24 movie that's
It
potential
would
in the
be pretty
making even
great.
better. Yeah, like there's so much you can do with it. But again, they had to do the slasher stuff, and that's fine. I mean, it was cool. You know, they had to get the X rating, and they definitely got their X rating with the violence and the corpses and all the stuff that's in this movie. Um, I really recommend it. I give it a 7 out of 10. Um, I mean, I just really love the use of mirrors in this movie as like kind of like a metaphor, and then using it as like a way to use trick photography for the transformation. There's a lot of great stuff about this. And you know, when Hammer horror is at its best, I feel like it's usually the plot twist from the like some kind of original idea they had and then change it, but also the execution of it and how much they can like use it as a minimum of the budget to kind of like, okay, minimum budget, what can we do? We don't have a monster. Let's change her into a man to a woman. That's perfect. We don't have to have a monster. And then you just go from there. And then you get a movie like this where it's like really thought provoking and really cool to watch. It's an hour and 37 minutes, folks. It's not even like a long, movie.
That's one of the
Um,
best parts is that these are pretty short. I'm giving this like I would say a 6.5 out of 10. I'm just about there with you. I think this is a much stronger movie. There are a lot of interesting elements to it. I mean the movie's very small, as you would imagine. Like it really only has a couple of primary locations, and it's very clearly going for the vibe of a Jack the Ripper, which I think makes sense. But yeah, I think given the limited scope and the limited budget, I think they did a lot.
just a quick note here. I want to mention that Ralph Bates was actually uh, scheduled slash contractually going to be the replacement Dracula for Christopher Lee in the series. But what happened during like the third or fourth movie when he was filming the movie, they found out that contractually all international markets required Christopher Lee to play Dracula. So they had to get him to come back to play Dracula in the movie, and they just eliminated him from the movie completely. And he was never going to play Dracula again. And it's like this thing where he was going to be the Dracula of the 70s, and they just couldn't have it because Christopher Lee was contractually obligated to come back. And Christopher Lee was pissed because he didn't want to play Dracula anymore, Jerome. So that's why for like two or three movies at that point, he just kind of stopped talking in the Dracula movies. Until you saw, I think you saw the one where he comes back in the 70s with Christopher or with Peter Cushing. But so just a little side note that,
Interesting.
yeah, he was supposed to be Dracula and he got screwed over because of the contracts. And I think this is one of the
Yeah.
movies afterward he signed up for. But he did other Hammer horror stuff. He did play a version of Victor Frankenstein and like a comedy version of Frankenstein that was released by Hammer Horror. But other than that, he's kind of known for these like 60s, 70s pictures, horror pictures, genre pictures. But he's a really great actor that I think no one really knows about. And I think it's because he didn't get the rub as becoming the new Dracula, which,
Yeah, I
which
mean
would have
that
been good or
certainly
bad.
didn't
I don't
help.
know.
I
Yeah. And
mean,
he
the
would have
thing
been a
that
good Dracula.
thing is Peter Cushing got Star Wars in 1977, so I think people kind of remember. And Moff Tarkin is a very memorable character. Like even though he doesn't have a lot to do, like he's in 4 or 5 scenes, but he's really good in them. And I think he kind of steals the show, so I think people remember him. Christopher Lee had this like late career renaissance, being in Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. So I think that really helps him, and Ralph Bates just doesn't have that.
Unfortunately. But again, if you're looking for like a good character actor or a good like British actor, for this time period, he's a good choice to kind of look at. He's got a good performance here and there, everything he does. So
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, that's kind of my double feature. I kind of wanted to show Jerome some, traditional Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee dynamic stuff, and then some interesting stuff where Hammer has to like, kind of like reinvent itself for the '70s because they're not nearly doing as good as the '60s in terms of box office. So they're kind of pushing the more X-rated stuff because of the time period. Because the
I mean, we
'70s,
are
we all
rapidly
know,
approaching we are rapidly approaching the slasher era with Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Friday the
which is
13th.
when Hammer dies out. So this is kind of like the last. '71 is kind of like one of their last good years, I would say, because I think there's some other cool stuff that comes out. I think there's like not a time travel, but like a vampire movie called Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, that kind of thing. Like they're going more into the violence, and so they kind of just run out of money. So there's no
Uh,
documentary. There's some documentaries out there about Hammer horror that I recommend watching because you'll see the history of like how it started out as like a normal company and then it kind of just developed into like a movie producing company once TV came in the '50s. So it's an interesting history. So I recommend checking it out.
all right, so next week, what are we going to be doing for our continuing Halloween series?
Okay, so it's the '80s remake of The Blob. I watched this last year. I was blown away how good and horrific it was, and I'm interested in Jerome's reaction to it because we both talked when we watched the original. We talked about Steve McQueen um, in the original Blob and how that was okay. Not a great horror movie, fun to watch, but it's just like old school '50s kind of vibe. But this case, they take all those tropes and just turn them on their ear. And this is like one of those '80s movies that I couldn't believe that I hadn't watched when I was younger. That I watched later in life, and I was like, "Damn, I wish I would have watched this when I was like 13. It would have hit harder." But it's a great horror movie. It's very shocking. Children deaths, and anytime there's a children or a child dying in a horror movie, you know that they're pushing the boundaries.
Oh
So
yeah,
yeah, and in this
in a
case,
big way for sure.
it's very horrific the way this kid dies. I'm not going to explain it, but given the movie's called The Blob, you can only kind of figure out what happens to the kid. And Matt Dillon is the lead punk character in this movie, and he does a great job. And it's probably, I don't know, maybe his best performance outside of Entourage.
All right, so that is what we have to look forward to next week. For Brian, I am Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.